You said it was just dinner. His voice cut through the dark like a blade. Claire nearly dropped her keys. Gabriel Moretti stood in the shadows of his own foyer, tie loose, eyes burning, blocking her path like a wall of controlled fury. 2 in the morning. She had been gone for hours. He had been counting every minute. 6 calls, he's stepping forward. I called you 6 times. My phone died, Jen. A demand. From a man who had spent 3 years pretending he felt nothing, and just spent 3 hours in the dark discovering he was wrong. Before we go any further, if this is your kind of story, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The clock on the mantle read 2 in the morning when Gabriel Moretti heard the sound he had been waiting for. A car engine, the soft creak of the iron gate, footsteps on wet gravel. He did not move from where he stood. He had been standing in the same spot for nearly 3 hours in the dark, beside the tall windows that faced the private road leading to the estate. The harbor beyond the glass was nothing but cold, black water and freezing rain, and the city lights blurred and dripped like watercolors left out in a storm. He had not turned on a single lamp. He had told himself it was because he was thinking. He had told himself it was because he was working through the problem of a missing shipment, trying to arrange the facts into something that made sense. He had been lying to himself since 11 o'clock. The iron gate at the foot of the drive swung open, and an unfamiliar sedan pulled through, stopped just inside, and left its engine running. Gabriel watched as the rear door opened and a figure stepped out into the rain. He recognized her before she even turned around. He would have recognized her in a crowd of 1,000 people on a moonless night. Claire Bennett, his housekeeper, his employee of 3 years. She was wearing her simple navy dress, the one she wore when she went somewhere. She considered nice in a dark winter coat that was doing a poor job of keeping the rain off her shoulders. She said something to the driver through the open door, something that looked like a thank you, and she gave him a small wave that had nothing in it except warmth and ordinary politeness. Then she turned toward the house and began to walk quickly, her heels clicking on the wet stone. Gabriel moved away from the window. He positioned himself in the foyer, in the shadows near the base of the staircase, and he waited. He heard her key in the lock. He heard the door swing open and the rush of cold air that came in with her. He heard her exhale tired, relieved, the particular sigh of a person who has finally made it home after a long night. And then he spoke. You said it was just dinner. Claire's gasp was sharp and involuntary. She stumbled backward half a step, her keys flying from her hand and clattering across the marble floor. She pressed her palm flat against the wall, breathing hard, and when she found him in the shadows, her expression shifted through 3 emotions in as many seconds: fear, then fury, then something sharp and controlled that was more dangerous than either. Gabriel. Her voice was steady even though her hand was not. What are you doing standing in the dark like that? You nearly gave me a heart attack. You didn't answer my question. She bent down to retrieve her keys. He could see her using the motion to collect herself, to arrange her face into something neutral. When she straightened, she looked at him directly and without apology. It was just dinner, she said. And then his car broke down, and we waited for roadside assistance. And my phone died. That is the whole story. His car. Yes, his car. So there was a man. Claire closed her eyes for precisely 1 second, the way she did when she was deciding whether to say the patient thing or the true thing. Gabriel, I told you I was having dinner with a friend. I told you before I left. I left a note on the kitchen counter because I always leave a note on the kitchen counter. You have never once asked about my dinner plans before tonight. You were out until 2 in the morning. I was. Because the car broke down and my phone died, and the roadside company took 90 minutes to arrive. None of that was in my control. What I choose to do with my evenings is, the space between them felt charged, the way the air feels before lightning. Gabriel stepped out of the shadows and into the thin gray light that came through the windows from the harbor lamps outside. He was still in his work clothes, the dark suit, the white shirt with the collar open now and the tie pulled loose. He had the look of a man who had intended to go to bed hours ago and had instead spent those hours in a room alone with his own thoughts. And the thoughts had not been kind to him. Who is he? Gabriel said. It was not quite a question. A friend, she paused. Samuel Price. We went to college together. I haven't seen him in almost 2 years. Something moved across Gabriel's face, a tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw that she had learned, over 3 years, to read like weather. Samuel Price, he repeated. Yes, and he drove you to dinner. His car broke down on the way home. I already explained this. Are you going to keep repeating everything I say back to me? Or are we going to have an actual conversation? Gabriel exhaled through his nose and turned away, which was the thing he did when he was losing an argument and had not yet decided to admit it. He walked toward the kitchen, and because she apparently was not afraid of him, a fact that still managed to surprise him, even after 3 years she followed him. You know what's interesting? Claire said, setting her keys on the counter and pulling her damp coat off. You said you were worried about security. You said you were worried because someone connected to your organization has been following employees. That's what you said. That's true. So your concern was professional. She folded the coat over the back of a chair and looked at him steadily. That's what you want me to believe, Claire. Because that's the only version of this story where you get to stand in the dark at 2 a.m, interrogating me when I walk through the door and still come out looking reasonable. She moved to the stove and filled the kettle without asking whether he wanted tea. She always made tea when she was angry. He had learned that in the first 6 months. But we both know that's not the whole story, is it? I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. She set the kettle on the burner and turned to face him. You were jealous. You can dress it up in security concerns and professional responsibility and any other language you want, but that's what it was. And I think part of you knows that standing in the dark waiting for me like that, that's not what an employer does when a housekeeper comes home late. That's not what any of this is. The kitchen was quiet except for the rain against the window and the distant sound of the harbor. Gabriel Moretti, a man who had faced down rivals, federal investigators, and a dozen different varieties of dangerous human being in his 40 years on this earth, did not have an answer. He stood in his own kitchen at 2 a.m. and stared at a woman in a damp navy dress who had just told him the truth he had been trying to avoid for longer than he was willing to count. My phone. Your phone what? You called me 6 times, Gabriel. 6. My phone was dead. There was nothing I could do. I know, she repeated it softly, not mocking, not cruel, just noting it. Then why are we here? He pulled a chair out from the table and sat down in it heavily, and for a moment he looked less like the man the Boston waterfront feared, and more like someone who had been awake for too long and was finally running out of the energy it took to pretend otherwise. I was worried, he said. That's true. It's also true that He stopped, pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. I was worried in a way that had nothing to do with security. Claire looked at him for a long moment. The kettle was beginning to hiss. She turned back to the counter and poured the water with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had made tea in that kitchen hundreds of times, for dozens of reasons, in dozens of moods. She set a mug in front of him without asking whether he wanted it. He wrapped both hands around it. Your friend, he said. Samuel, what does he do? He's an investigator. Financial crimes, mostly. He works for a nonprofit that goes after companies that use predatory practices to displace low-income renters. Gabriel said nothing. His hands stayed still around the mug. He actually offered to help me with something, Claire continued. I've been looking into going back to nursing school. I paid off my mother's medical debt last year, finally, after 4 years. And now I'm thinking about what comes next. She looked at him across the kitchen. I'm thinking about leaving domestic work. The words landed in the room and didn't immediately leave. Gabriel looked at her. She looked back at him. Outside, the harbor was still dark, and the rain was still falling, and the clock on the wall moved forward in its small, steady increments, indifferent to the size of what had just been said. You're thinking about leaving, he said. I've been thinking about it for a while. You didn't say anything. You didn't ask. He absorbed that. He turned the mug in his hands, rotating it slowly against the surface of the table. When? I don't know yet. I'm just exploring. Samuel knows people at the university. He said he could introduce me to some people in the financial aid office. She wrapped her own hands around her mug and studied him. You look like I just told you someone died. I'm fine. Gabriel. I'm fine, Claire. She made a sound that was just barely not a laugh. You know you're the only person in this house who says, I'm fine, when they mean something completely different. Everyone else in your life tells you what you want to hear. I have never once been able to figure out why you keep expecting me to do the same. He looked up at her. Were you afraid something happened to your housekeeper? She said quietly. Or were you afraid I might build a life that doesn't include you? The question sat in the air between them like something physical. Like a door that had been standing locked for 3 years and someone had just found the key. Gabriel opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at his tea, and then at the window where the rain was now streaming in long, shivering lines down the glass, and then back at her. I don't, he began. And then they both heard it. It was a small sound. The kind of sound that shouldn't exist at 2 a.m, In a house where every door was locked, and every alarm was set, and every camera was running the sound of something settling on the marble in the entrance hall. Not the house shifting, not the pipes, something that had weight. Claire's eyes moved to the doorway. Gabriel was already on his feet. He moved with a speed and quietness that still managed to startle her, even after 3 years of working for him. He was across the kitchen and into the entrance hall in seconds, and she followed him, and they both saw it at the same moment. Mud. A small smear of it on the white marble floor, just inside the entrance to the main hallway, near the base of the stairs. It hadn't been there when she walked through 20 minutes ago. She knew, because she had cleaned that floor herself at 5 in the afternoon, and because she was the kind of person who noticed the condition of floors the way other people notice the weather automatically, without trying. Gabriel crouched down and looked at it. His face had changed. The man who had been standing in the kitchen arguing about jealousy and nursing school was gone. In his place was something older and harder and very, very still. "That didn't come from your shoes," he said. "No." She looked down at her heels. "Clean, it didn't," he straightened. He did not say anything else for a moment. He was listening. The house made its usual sounds, the rain on the roof, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant creak of the building. Settling in the cold, and underneath all of them, nothing. "Silence that press," he said. "Absolutely not." He turned and looked at her, and she looked back at him with the expression that meant she was not going to be moved by anything short of a natural disaster, and possibly not even then. "Claire, I'm not standing in the kitchen by myself while you walk toward whatever that mud means. That's not something I'm willing to do." Something shifted in his expression that she couldn't quite name. Not frustration. Not quite admiration. Something between them. "Then stay behind me," he said. "Fine." He moved through the house with a purpose that made the darkness feel different, not threatening, but navigated, like he had a map of every shadow and angle. She stayed close behind him, close enough that she could have put her hand on his shoulder if she had wanted to, and part of her understood that she was aware of that proximity in a way she was not fully comfortable examining. He went through every room. Nothing. Nothing in the sitting room, nothing in the dining room, nothing in the corridor that ran alongside the back of the house. Then he stopped at the door to his study. The door was closed, but the handle was not in quite the right position. Gabriel kept things precise. She knew that. He closed every door with the handle turned to the same angle, a small unconscious habit she had noticed in the first month. The handle was slightly off. He pushed the door open. The study looked the same. Books on the shelves, desk in the center, the dark screen of the computer. Nothing broken, nothing thrown, nothing obviously wrong. But Gabriel crossed the room immediately and crouched in front of the bottom left drawer of his desk. It was closed, locked, or it should have been. He tried it. It opened. For 3 seconds, he was completely still. Then he stood and turned, and the expression on his face was one Claire had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something that lived underneath both of those things, something foundational and cold. "The ledger," he said. "It's gone." "What ledger?" He looked at her. He seemed to be making a decision, and she saw the moment he made it, the moment he decided that the calculation had shifted, that she needed to know at least part of what she was standing in the middle of. "A shipping ledger," he said. "Coded, but..." He stopped. "They're gone. Someone broke into your house," Claire said. "Tonight, while you were standing in the foyer waiting for me to come home." "Yes." She let the weight of that settle. "So whoever took it knew you were distracted." Gabriel looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, that whoever had been watching this house had also been watching the pattern of it, had known when Gabriel would be distracted, had known tonight was the night to move. The rain outside was heavier now. The harbor beyond the windows was black and formless. And in the city, someone was walking away from this house with something they should not have. "Gabriel," Claire said quietly. "Yes." "Tell me what's actually in that ledger." He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that she began to wonder if he was going to tell her it was none of her business, that she should go to bed, that this was handled. But this was the thing about Gabriel Moretti that 3 years of working for him had taught her. He was a man built out of walls within walls, doors within doors, each one locked tighter than the last. But there were moments, rare ones, when something slipped, when the walls showed a crack. And in those moments, if you were very still and very patient, and you looked at him like he was a person, and not a reputation, he would sometimes let you through. 18 months, he said. "I've been trying to turn this company legitimate for 18 months. Moving money away from the criminal operations, redirecting it into real shipping contracts, real logistics, real business. He looked at the empty drawer. The ledger has the records of every transaction, the ones I've redirected, the ones I'm trying to make clean, and the ones that weren't clean yet. Yes. His voice was flat. Both. So if someone gives those records to investigate, they'll see a man who approved 18 months of illegal transactions. They won't see someone who was trying to end them. They'll see what those records show, not what I was trying to do. He paused. And if the people inside my organization see them, they'll think you're weak, she said. Or worse. Yes. Claire stood in the middle of the study in her damp dress and looked at a man she had made tea for 600 times and discovered she did not entirely know. She had known there were things about him she didn't know anyone who worked in this house, understood that some doors were never opened. But this was different. This was the architecture of a choice. A man who had inherited something dark trying, in secret, to build something clean. Only a handful of people knew the ledger existed, he said. It was not quite a question. Then you know who took it, Claire said. I have a very specific idea, he said, and I need to think carefully about what I do next. She nodded. She looked at the empty drawer one more time. Gabriel, she said. Yes. Whatever you decide to do next, I need you to know something. She looked at him steadily. I'm not a security risk. I'm not a variable in whatever this is. I'm a person who has worked in your house for 3 years, who just walked home at 2 a.m. after a car broke down, who found mud on your floor and an empty drawer in your study. She paused. And I need you to remember that when whatever happens next starts happening, because I have a feeling it's going to matter. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something she had not expected. You're the only person in this house who tells me the truth, he said. You have been for 3 years. I don't know if I ever thanked you for that. She picked up her coat from where she had draped it over the arm of his desk chair and walked toward the door. You haven't, she said. She turned back one last time from the doorway. And Gabriel? She looked at him in the faint light from the hallway. The next time you decide to stand in the dark waiting for me, at least turn a light on. You look like a ghost. She disappeared down the corridor, and the sound of her footsteps faded, and Gabriel Moretti stood alone in his emptied study with rain on the windows and a question eating at the back of his mind. Not the question of who had taken the ledger. He was fairly certain he knew the answer to that one. The question he could not stop turning over, the one that had no clean answer and no safe answer, and no answer that didn't cost him. Something was the one Claire had asked him in the kitchen before any of this. Were you afraid something happened to your housekeeper? Or were you afraid she might build a life that doesn't include you? He stood there in the dark for a long time, and the rain kept falling. And somewhere in the city, a man he trusted was carrying a ledger that could destroy everything he had spent 18 months trying to build. And Gabriel Moretti, who had never in his life been afraid of a single human being, was discovering that he was terrified of 2 things at once: the enemy moving against him in the dark, and the woman who had just walked down his hallway and told him the truth. He didn't know which one frightened him more. That, he decided, was the most honest thing he had learned all night. Gabriel did not sleep that night. He sat at the desk, where the ledger used to be, and went through every name he knew. The way a man goes through the pockets of a coat he's already checked 3 times, hoping something will appear that wasn't there before. The names were all familiar. The possibilities were all uncomfortable. And when the gray Boston morning finally pushed itself through the windows and the harbor sounds started up boats, gulls, the distant machinery of the docks, he had arrived at the same answer he'd arrived at, around 4 a.m. and hadn't wanted to accept. Vincent Hale, his second in command, the man who had been beside him for 11 years, the man who had helped him carry his father's casket when the old man died and left Gabriel a business built on fear and violence, and the kind of loyalty that only lasted as long as the money did. Vincent Hale, who had known about the ledger, who had been in the study the week before, asking questions about the shipping accounts that Gabriel had answered carefully, giving away nothing specific, but perhaps giving away more than he'd realized, who had been pushing, for months now, against Gabriel's decisions to restructure the business, to pull back from certain operations, to stop taking certain calls. Gabriel sat with that knowledge until it hardened into something he could carry. Then he stood up, straightened his shirt, and went downstairs to see if Claire had made coffee. She had. She always had coffee made by 7. It was one of those small, consistent facts about her that he had absorbed without ever making a conscious decision to notice. The coffee was always ready. The kitchen was always orderly. And if she passed him in the hallway in the morning, she always said good morning first, before he could decide whether he was going to say it or not. She was at the counter when he walked in, her back to him, reading something on her phone. She was wearing her work clothes now, dark slacks, a cream-colored blouse, and her hair was pulled back. She didn't turn around when he came in, which meant she heard him but wasn't ready to acknowledge him yet, which meant she was still thinking about last night. He poured himself coffee and waited. "Did you sleep?" she asked without turning. "No, I didn't think so." She set her phone down and turned around. There were shadows under her eyes, too, but she was dressed and composed in the way she always was. And she looked at him with the particular directness that he had decided, somewhere around year 2 of working with her, was either the bravest thing he'd ever seen or the most infuriating, depending on the day. "I need to make some calls this morning," he said. I assumed. "There's going to be some activity around the house, people coming in. I need you to go about your normal routine and act like nothing is different." She tilted her head slightly. "Gabriel, someone broke into this house last night and stole documents from your private study. There is something very different. I know that. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you not to react to whatever you see or hear today in a way that signals to anyone that you know something." He looked at her. "Can you do that?" She was quiet for a moment, then yes, "I can do that." She paused. "But I need something in return." "What?" "I need you to tell me what's actually happening. Not the version you'd tell a subordinate. Not the version you'd give your attorney. The real version." He looked at his coffee. He looked at the window. He looked at her. 18 months ago, he said, "I made a decision. A very quiet, very private decision that I told almost no one about. I started redirecting Moretti money. Not the whole operation, I couldn't do it that way. It would have been noticed immediately. But piece by piece, account by account, I started moving funds out of the criminal operations and into legitimate shipping contracts. Real biz work." He set his cup down. "I built a paper trail. Evidence that what I was doing was intentional, that I was trying to clean the company up, not just hide money. That ledger was that paper trail." Claire listened. She did not interrupt. "If the wrong person inside the organization gets that ledger," he continued, "they'll use it to prove I've been going soft, that I've been betraying the operation. They'll move against me." He paused. "If federal investigators get it, which is the other option, they won't see the intent. They'll see 18 months of transactions that look, on the surface, like I was personally managing illegal accounts. Either way," Claire said slowly, "you're exposed. Either way. So whoever took it holds both weapons." "Yes, and you think you know who it was?" He was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I have a strong suspicion." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her processing it, turning it over, the way she did with information she was taking seriously rather than just receiving. "Gabriel, if Vincent Hale took that ledger," she stopped herself, recalibrated. "I haven't said any names, you haven't," he agreed. "And neither have I. Then we understand each other." She picked up her coffee mug. "I'll go about my normal routine, and you'll make your calls." She moved toward the doorway. Then she stopped without turning around. "One more thing." "Yes. Last night you said someone connected to your organization has been following employees. Is that true, or was that the cover story for the jealousy?" "A beat both," he said. She nodded once and walked out. Gabriel stood in the empty kitchen and listened to her footsteps retreat down the hallway and thought about the particular quality of courage it took to be the person in a room who said the true thing out loud. He had surrounded himself, for most of his adult life, with people who told him what he wanted to hear. He hadn't fully understood, until recently, how much that had cost him. By 10 o'clock, Vincent Hale was in Gabriel's living room. He had come without being asked, arrived at the gate with the confidence of a man who expected to be let in. And was, because refusing him without a reason would have been its own kind of signal. He was 61, built like a man who had spent decades in rooms where being large was an advantage, with a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that were always calculating something you couldn't quite see. "Heard there was a problem last night," Vincent said, settling into the chair across from Gabriel's desk as though he owned the house. "Security breach," someone said. Someone said. Gabriel's voice was even. "Word travels fast. In this business it does." Vincent folded his hands in his lap. "How bad is it?" "Manageable." "What was some papers?" Gabriel watched him. "Nothing irreplaceable." Vincent nodded slowly. The way a man nods when he already knows the answer to the question he's just asked. "You should be looking at the people who were in and out of this house recently. Narrow the field." "I intend to." "Your girl was out late last night." He said it casually, the way you'd mention the weather. "The housekeeper, Claire something." Gabriel did not move. "Bennett," he said. "Her name is Claire Bennett." "Right, Bennett." Vincent's eyes moved around the room the way they always did, measuring distances and exits and the positions of things. She was out until what, 2 in the morning? With a man? She was with a friend. A friend. Vincent repeated it with an inflection that was not quite a smile. What kind of friend keeps a young woman out until 2 in the morning? The kind whose car broke down. Gabriel's voice was still even, but there was something underneath it now, something that a careful listener would have noticed, and a wise man would have been cautious about. You seem very informed about my housekeeper's schedule, Vincent. I pay attention, he shrugged. That's why you keep me around. Who told you what time she came home? A small pause. Barely perceptible. One of the night security mentioned it. Another pause. This one slightly longer. I don't remember. You know how these things work, word gets around. Gabriel looked at him steadily. The man she was with. His name is Samuel Price. Did you know that? I'm asking. Never heard of him. Vincent met Gabriel's eyes without blinking, which was the thing that made him dangerous. He had always been able to lie with his whole body, not just his face. Why, who is he? A financial investigator, Gabriel said. Works for a nonprofit. Goes after predatory property companies. Vincent was still for a moment. Then he said, interesting choice of dinner companion for a housekeeper. Old college friend. Vincent stood up, smoothing his jacket. I'd look into that if I were you. A woman in your house, friendly with a financial investigator, on the same night something goes missing from your study. That's not a coincidence I'd be comfortable with. Gabriel stood too. He did not come around the desk. He stayed where he was, behind it, and he looked at Vincent across the space between them. I'll look into everything that needs looking into. Good. Vincent moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, not quite turning back, the position of a man who is delivering a closing remark he has already rehearsed. She seems like a nice girl, Gabriel. I'd be careful getting too attached to the household staff. Sentiment is a liability in our position, he left. His footsteps crossed the foyer, and the front door opened and closed, and Gabriel stood behind his desk for a long moment, looking at the space where the man had been. Then he picked up his phone and called Anthony, who was the only person in the organization he was still certain of. Pull everything we have on Vincent's accounts for the last 6 months, he said when Anthony answered, and find out which of the night security team he's been talking to. How discreet. Very. He ended the call and stood there, and the house was quiet around him, and somewhere upstairs he could hear the distant sound of Claire moving through rooms, doing the ordinary work of keeping a house, which was what she did while powerful men tried to figure out how to destroy each other. He had a sudden, uncomfortable thought that she was safer not being in this house at all. He had a second thought, harder and more honest, that he was not willing to let her leave it. He sat with the discomfort of both. Claire found the receipt at 2:30 that afternoon. She was not looking for it. That was the thing she told herself afterward. The thing that made it feel less like she had been investigating and more like she had simply been doing her job. She was cleaning the study, not searching it, cleaning it the way she cleaned it every week, moving methodically through each section of the room with the efficiency of someone who had done this particular job so many times that her hands knew where to go before her mind did. She was cleaning behind the radiator near the east wall, the old cast iron one that leaked heat unevenly and accumulated dust in the curved sections at the back when her cloth caught on something. A small rectangle of paper wedged into the gap between the radiator and the wall. She pulled it out carefully, because she always pulled things out carefully, because you never knew what something was until you looked at it. It was a torn corner of a parking receipt. The upper portion was missing, so there was no date, no time, no amount. But along the bottom edge, where the receipt had been ripped, there was a partial address, a dock number, and below that, barely legible in the faded ink, Moretti Harbor Logistics East Pier access. She stood there for a moment, holding the small piece of paper, thinking. East Pier, she knew the piers. She had heard the name on phone calls, on documents that passed through the house in the normal course of business, on the maps in the archives. She had spent 2 weeks organizing last spring when Gabriel had wanted his father's records cataloged. East Pier access was for one specific dock, a private one that was used not by the main shipping operation, but by a smaller subsidiary that handled custom transport. She knew, without being able to say exactly how she knew, that this piece of paper had not been behind that radiator last week. She cleaned behind that radiator every week. She would have found it. Someone had been in this room recently, not just last night. Before last night. Someone who had been in this room and had left this behind not on purpose, Because people who left things on purpose didn't leave torn corners of receipts behind radiators. This was an accident. A small, revealing accident. She set the receipt down on the desk, photographed with her phone, and then placed it exactly where she had found it. Then she went and found Gabriel. He was on a call when she knocked on the door of the sitting room, but he ended it when he saw her face. She had learned over 3 years that there were very few ways to communicate urgency to Gabriel Moretti without saying a word. The trick was not to look frightened. The trick was to look exactly as calm as you were not and let him read the gap between the two. He read it in about 4 seconds. "What?" he said. She told him about the receipt. She showed him the photograph. She watched his face as he looked at it, and she watched the recognition move through him, not surprise, which told her he had already suspected, but a particular grim confirmation which told her his suspicion was hardening into something definite. "East Pier," he said. "Yes. When do you think it was left there?" "Not last week. I would have found it." He looked at her. "You clean behind the radiator every week." "Every week without fail," she said. "So sometime in the last 7 days, someone was in that room who shouldn't have been. Before the break-in last night. Which means last night wasn't spontaneous. Someone has been in this house more than once." Gabriel set the phone down slowly. He looked at the photograph for another long moment. Then he said, "I need you to think carefully. In the last week, anyone you saw somewhere they didn't normally go, any routine that changed, any request you didn't make but found completed anyway." She had already been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it since she woke up this morning, actually, running through the last week the way she ran through rooms methodically, looking for what was out of place. "The camera in the back corridor," she said. "The one that covers the entrance to the private wing. 3 days ago, one of the maintenance crew told me it had been replaced. I didn't request a replacement. The old one was fine the last time I noticed it." Gabriel's expression did not change, but his stillness became a different kind of stillness. "And 2 days ago," she continued, "one of the men I didn't recognize was carrying cleaning supplies from the private wing. I assumed you'd asked for something, so I didn't think to question it. But I never asked anyone to go into that wing. And you have a standing instruction that that section of the house is my responsibility." "Who was the man?" "I don't know his name, but he's been around the grounds the last few weeks. He comes with the second rotation. Dark jacket, keeps his hat low. I can give you a more specific description if you need it." Gabriel stared at her. She stared back. "You noticed all of this," he said. It was not quite a question. "I notice everything in this house," she said, and there was nothing boastful in the way she said it. It was simply true, the way it was true that the sun came up in the morning. "It's my job to notice, because usually it doesn't matter." She paused. "It matters now." He was quiet for a moment that felt very full. Then he said, "The camera replacement. If the old camera was functioning correctly, then someone replaced it with one they could control," she finished, "or one they could disable without the system flagging an error, because the system would see an active camera and assume everything was fine." He reached for his phone. "Gabriel," she said before he could dial. He paused. "I need you to understand something. I am helping you with this because I live in this house and I was apparently being watched, and that makes it my business as much as yours. I am not helping you because I owe you anything or because you can demand it of me." She met his eyes. "And when this is resolved, we are going to have a different conversation about boundaries, about what you are and aren't entitled to when it comes to how I spend my evenings." He held her gaze, he said. "Good." She moved to leave. "I'll write up everything I noticed this week. Dates, times, descriptions. You can give it to whoever you trust, Claire." She stopped. "The receipt. Don't touch it again. Don't tell anyone else you found it." He paused. "And be careful. I mean that, not as your employer." As he stopped himself, edited, chose differently. "Be careful." She looked at him for a moment, and something passed between them that neither of them named. Then she walked out. The rest of the afternoon moved with the particular tension of a house that knows something is wrong, but hasn't yet broken open. Gabriel moved through his calls and his meetings with the specific controlled energy of a man who is running a calculation behind every conversation, measuring distances and timelines, and the loyalty of men he has known for years and is now wondering about. Anthony came and went. Papers, information arrived in fragments. Claire moved through her work with the same focused efficiency she always had, but her eyes were moving differently, cataloging, comparing, noting. She had always paid attention to the house. Now she was paying attention to it in a way she understood for the first time had strategic value. At 4 in the afternoon, She sat down at the kitchen table and wrote out everything she'd noticed in the past 7 days. Not in order of importance, but in chronological order, because chronological order was how patterns revealed themselves. The maintenance crew rotation, the camera, the man with the cleaning supplies. 2 separate occasions when she had returned to a room that should have been empty and found it slightly warmer than it should have been, as though someone had been there recently. A phone call she had overheard 3 days ago, not the content, which she hadn't been able to make out, but the tone, which had been the particular low urgency of someone who did not want to be heard and was not expecting to be. She looked at what she'd written. Then she added at the bottom, the man on the phone was not Gabriel. She slid the paper under Gabriel's study door. Then she went and made dinner for one, because Gabriel had not eaten anything since the coffee this morning, and she doubted he had thought about food at all, and because making food was one of the things she could do that existed cleanly outside of all of this and felt for a few minutes like something ordinary. She was washing the dinner dishes when Gabriel appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding the paper she had slid under his door. "This is precise," he said. "I'm a precise person." He came and sat down at the kitchen table, which he almost never did. He usually ate standing up or at his desk or not at all. The kitchen was her space, in some unspoken understanding that had developed over 3 years, and him sitting down in it felt like a small but deliberate crossing of a border. She dried her hands and turned around. "The phone call," he said. "Can you narrow down the time?" 6:18 in the evening. 3 days before the break-in. "I was coming back from the garden with herbs for dinner." He wrote something on the edge of the paper. "The man with the cleaning supplies. Height 6 feet approximately. Broad through the shoulders." He moved like someone who was trying to look like he belonged somewhere he didn't. She paused. He was too careful with the supplies. Like someone who'd been given props and told to carry them naturally, but hadn't practiced enough. Gabriel looked up at her. "You got all of that from one pass through a corridor. I told you, I noticed things." She sat down across from him at the table, another small border crossing, one she made consciously. "Gabriel, tell me about the housing scheme." His expression shifted. "What housing scheme?" "Samuel's investigation." She held his gaze steadily. "He's looking into predatory property companies that are buying up East Boston apartments through shell corporations and forcing low-income tenants out. He told me about it at dinner. He's been working on it for almost a year. He said the shell companies are difficult to trace because they're nested inside legitimate business operations." She paused. "How many shell corporations does the Moretti organization operate?" The silence stretched for a long, taut moment. Gabriel set the paper down very carefully. "What are you asking me?" "I think you know what I'm asking you. Claire, are those apartments connected to Moretti money?" He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked at the space between them with the expression of a man who has been carrying a weight he didn't know had a name and has just been handed the bill. "I don't know," he said. "That's not good enough." "I know it isn't." His voice was quiet, stripped of the controlled authority he wore like armor. "There are parts of the operation I inherited that I haven't fully mapped yet. The legitimate restructuring I've been trying to build, I don't have eyes on everything that was already in place. If some of those shell corporations predate my restructuring," he stopped. "I genuinely don't know. But it's possible." "Yes," he said. She took a breath. "Samuel's case, his investigation. If those companies are connected to Moretti money and Samuel is building a case against them, then someone inside my organization knew about him before last night," Gabriel said, "and knew that you knew him, and decided that was a thread worth pulling." He looked at her. "Claire, I am sorry. I am telling you right now, regardless of what I do or don't know about those shell corporations, if Moretti money was used to displace those tenants, that is not something I authorized, and it is not something I would have authorized. You don't get credit," she said, "for ignoring the damage just because you didn't personally order it." The words landed in the room and did not leave. Gabriel looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said quietly. Those people lost their homes, Gabriel. Families. Elderly people. People who didn't have the option to just find somewhere else." Her voice was steady, but it was the kind of steady that cost something. "And if your name is on the money that funded that, even indirectly, even through an operation you inherited, the consequences are real, regardless of your intentions." "I know, do you?" "Yes," he met her eyes without flinching. "I do, and I'm telling you that if there's a connection, I will find it and I will address it. Not to protect myself from the investigation, because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "And I know that might sound like exactly what a man in my position would say to avoid accountability. So I understand if you don't believe me yet." She was quiet. She looked at him with the particular clarity she sometimes had, the kind that made him feel visible in a way that was not entirely comfortable and not entirely unwelcome. "I want to believe you," she said at last. "I'm not sure that's the same thing as believing you." "It's a start," he said. She stood up. She moved to the counter and opened a cabinet and took out a small box, the kind that pharmacies put bandages in, and set it on the table in front of him. "You cut your hand on something," she said, nodding toward his left hand. He looked down. He hadn't noticed. There was a thin line of dried blood along the knuckle of his index finger. He must have caught it on the edge of the drawer when he was confirming the ledger was gone. "Put a bandage on it." She turned back to the sink. He looked at the box, then at her back, and there was something on his face in that moment, something unguarded and surprised and quiet that she did not see because she was facing the other direction. He put the bandage on. And then, without quite deciding to, he said, "I waited for you last night because when I imagined you sitting across a table from someone else, laughing the way you laugh in the kitchen when you think I can't hear, I realized." He stopped, regrouped. "I realized the house would feel like a different place if you weren't in it." The water ran in the sink. Claire didn't turn around for a long moment. When she did, her face was careful and complicated and honest. "Wanting me doesn't mean you've earned me," she said. "I know that. And protecting me or trying to is not the same thing as—" I know his voice was quiet. "I know the difference. I'm not," he exhaled. "I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you something true, and I'd rather you know the true thing than not know it." He looked at his bandaged hand. "That's all." She stood there for a moment, looking at him at her kitchen table in his rumpled work clothes with a bandage on his knuckle and 3 hours of sleep behind him, looking less like the man Boston feared and more like someone who had been honest for the first time in a very long while and wasn't entirely sure what to do with the exposure. She made a decision. "All right," she said. She sat back down across from him. She put her hands on the table. "Then here's a true thing in return. When I walked through that door last night and heard your voice, I was afraid for exactly 2 seconds. Not because you sounded threatening, because you sounded—" She stopped, chose the word carefully. "Desperate. And it occurred to me that I had never heard that in your voice before. And it did something to me that I haven't quite figured out yet." Gabriel looked at her. She looked back. "That's all I'm saying," she said. "That's enough," he said. And then the lights in the house went out. All of them. Every lamp, every screen, every indicator light on every appliance gone. The house dropped into total darkness. And in the silence that followed, Claire's new phone buzzed on the counter behind her. She reached for it in the dark. Gabriel was already moving, his chair scraping back. She read the message on the screen. She read it twice to make sure she had it right. Then she said, "Gabriel, I see it." He was beside her. She hadn't heard him cross the room, but he was there, reading over her shoulder, his breathing controlled in the careful way that meant he was managing something very large. The message on the screen said, "Bring Gabriel to Pier 19 before midnight, or Samuel Price disappears." The message stayed on the screen for 3 seconds before Gabriel took the phone out of Claire's hand. He read it again, 19. Samuel Price. Then he set the phone face down on the counter and said, very quietly, "Go upstairs." "No," Claire said. "Claire," I said no. Her voice was steady in the darkness in a way that surprised even her. "Samuel is my friend. He was taken because of information connected to both of us. You don't get to tell me to go upstairs and wait." Gabriel turned away from her. She could hear him breathing, could hear the particular rhythm of a man who is trying to control something. He is not accustomed to feeling the specific battle, a part of him that wanted to act, and the part of him that knew that acting wrong here would cost. "The lights," she said. "How do we get them back?" "Anthony will handle it. The generator should trip automatically." Even as he said it, the emergency lighting along the floor of the corridor came on a low amber line that turned everything into shadow and outline. "There it is. They cut the power to send us that message," she said. "Not to actually disable the security system. No, if they wanted to disable the system, they would have done it quietly. This was theater." He picked up the phone again. "They want me afraid. They want me reactive. Then don't be." She moved closer, not giving him the option of treating her like furniture in this conversation. "You said someone inside your organization has been following employees. You know it's Vincent, and now Samuel has been taken. Tell me how these things connect." Gabriel looked at her in the amber light, and she could see him making the same decision she'd watched him make in the kitchen the night before, the one where he chose to tell her the truth instead of the manageable version. "Vincent stole the ledger," he said. "Not just to use against me inside the organization. He's planning to combine it with Samuel's evidence about the housing scheme. The ledger has transaction records. Samuel's investigation has proof of the shell corporations and the displaced tenants. Together, those two pieces of evidence don't just implicate the Moretti operation, they make it look like I personally orchestrated every part of it. The financial fraud, the housing displacement, all of it. He paused. With that package, Vincent walks into the FBI and makes a deal. He gives them me, fully assembled, and walks away clean. He takes control of what's left of the organization, which won't be much, but it'll be enough. Claire absorbed this. He's not just trying to remove you, she said. He's trying to replace you by destroying you completely. Yes. And Samuel was taken because his evidence is the missing half of Vincent's case. Samuel's evidence is already built. It's documented, it's sourced, it's ready. All Vincent needs is the ledger, which he has, and Samuel's cooperation in framing the handover as a legitimate whistleblower situation. He stopped. Or he forces Samuel to hand over the evidence directly and eliminates the witness. Claire heard the last 4 words and felt something cold move through her chest. She did not show it on her face. Then we can't wait until midnight. No, and you can't walk into Pier 19 from the front. That's what he expects. You walk in from the front, you walk into whatever he set up. I know. Then listen to me. She took a breath. Last spring, when I was organizing your father's archives, the records, going back to the original harbor operations, there were maintenance maps in those boxes. Old ones, from when the pier buildings were first built. I looked at all of them because I was cataloging everything, and I cross-referenced them with the current property documents to make sure the archive was complete. She looked at him steadily. Pier 19 has a service tunnel. It runs under the main shipping office and connects to the back of the warehouse on Harbor Street. That warehouse is still listed under Moretti Harbor Logistics as a legitimate subsidiary. Gabriel stared at her. You can enter through the warehouse, she said. Come through the tunnel from the back while Samuel is being held in the front office. Vincent will be watching the pier entrance. He will not be watching the floor. The silence between them lasted exactly 4 seconds. How long have you known about that tunnel? Gabriel said. Since April, she said, when I was organizing the archives. You never mentioned it. I catalog things, she said simply. I don't know which things will matter until they do. Another silence. Then Gabriel said, if you know about the tunnel, you know this house better than anyone who works for me. I know this house better than anyone, period, she said, including you. He looked at her for a long moment with something on his face. She had no clean name for something between astonishment and an emotion he was not ready to call by its right name in a crisis. At 8:30 in the evening, with a friend's life in the balance. You're coming with me, he said. And it was not a question this time. It was an ignoted once. Yes, I am, he called Anthony. Anthony arrived within 20 minutes, which told Claire he had already been close, probably had been since the power cut, which told her Gabriel had already put people in motion before the lights came back on. Anthony was quiet and careful and moved through rooms the way a man does when he has spent years practicing how to take up as little space as possible while still being entirely present. He listened to Gabriel's instructions without expression, nodded twice, and then looked at Claire with a kind of neutral assessment that she met without flinching. She goes in first, Anthony said. Vincent's expecting Gabriel. If she arrives alone, she has maybe 4 minutes before he knows something's wrong. 3, Claire said. He's careful. Give me 3. Anthony looked at her again, then at Gabriel, then back at her, and this time the assessment had a different quality in it, something closer to professional respect. 3, he agreed. They spent 40 minutes preparing. Gabriel gave her a microphone small, pressed into the inside of her collar, and went over the layout of Pier 19 3 times, using one of the old maps Anthony pulled from a digital archive. She absorbed everything on the first pass and asked clarifying questions on the second that made Anthony stop and look at her again. She's done this before? Anthony said to Gabriel. No, Gabriel said. She's just like this. At 9:40, Gabriel tried one more time. Not to stop her, she knew him well enough now to know he'd stop trying to stop her. But because he needed to say it, if anything goes wrong, then we deal with it when it goes wrong, she said. She was pulling on her coat, the dark one, the same one she'd worn home 2 nights ago when all of this started with a muddy footprint on white marble. Gabriel, look at me. He looked at her. I know you want to protect me. I understand that impulse, and I'm not dismissing it. But the way you protect me tonight is by trusting me to do my part. That is the only version of tonight where this works. She buttoned the coat. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that Anthony found something to study on the wall. Yes, Gabriel said, I can do that. Good. She turned toward the door. Then let's go get my friend back. The drive to Pier 19 took 11 minutes. Claire spent those 11 minutes in silence, going through everything she knew in the order she would need to know it. The layout, the tunnel entrance, the location of the main office relative to the warehouse. The fact that Vincent would almost certainly have men at the pier entrance and along the dock, but fewer inside the building itself, because Vincent was a man who organized from the outside and he thought about perimeters and exits, and who could be seen, not about what happened in rooms after the doors were locked. She had noticed that about him in the 3 times he had come to the house. He always clocked the exits first. He was a man who thought about running before he thought about staying. That, she decided, was a weakness. She got out of the car alone, 2 blocks from the pier, and walked the rest of the way in the cold. The rain from 2 nights ago had cleared, but the air off the harbor still had water in it, that particular Boston cold that found the gap between your coat collar and your neck and settled there like something deliberate. She walked steadily, not quickly, not slowly. The way a woman walks when she has somewhere to be and is not afraid of the dark. There were 2 men at the pier entrance. She saw them before they saw her, which told her something. They were watching for a car, not a person on foot. She adjusted. I have a message for Vincent Hale, she said when they stopped her, from Gabriel Moretti. They looked at each other. They looked at her, at the navy dress under the dark coat, at the fact that she was a woman, at the fact that she was alone. And she watched them make the assessment that people almost always made about her, the same assessment Vincent had made when he called her the housekeeper and your girl, and assumed she was background, ambient, decorative. She let them make it. The assessment was wrong, but it was useful. They took her inside. The interior of the pier building was large and cold and smelled of salt water and old machinery. There were wooden crates stacked along one wall, orange emergency lighting bolted to the ceiling beams, and near the far end of the main room, a glass-walled office that had once been used for inventory. Through the glass, she could see Samuel. He was seated in a metal chair, his wrists bound behind him. He had a cut above his left eyebrow that had dried to a thin, dark line. He was alive. He was alert. When he saw her come through the door, something moved across his face, not relief, not yet. Something more complicated. A question. She gave him the smallest possible shake of her head. Don't react, he understood. Vincent Hale stepped out of the office. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize, heavier than his usual clothes. A concession to the harbor cold, and he had his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who has already decided how this ends, and is simply waiting for the performance to conclude. Miss Bennett, he said, you came alone. Gabriel sent me, she said. He wanted to verify that Samuel was alive before he agreed to come himself. Wise. Vincent walked a slow semicircle around her, which was a performance of dominance so obvious she almost found it boring. And is he satisfied? He will be when I report back. You're not reporting back. Vincent's voice was pleasant, the way a door slamming is pleasant, final, and clean. You and your friend are going to stay here while Gabriel comes to me directly. That was the agreement. The agreement was that he'd come by midnight, Claire said. It's not midnight yet, and he doesn't move without confirmation that Samuel is unharmed. Vincent studied her. She could feel him doing it, the calculation, the measurement, the same thing he did in every room he entered, looking for the exit, looking for the weakness. He won't come, Vincent said. Will he? This is a stalling tactic. Welcome to believe that, Claire said. I'm going to believe exactly what the evidence tells me. He moved toward her, closing half the distance between them. Here is what I know about Gabriel Moretti. He is a sentimental man. He has always been a sentimental man. His father knew it. I knew it. Everyone who has ever worked with him knows it. And you, he gestured toward her with a small dismissive motion. You are the most recent object of that sentiment, which means you are a lever, which means you being in this building is worth more to me than whatever confirmation you were sent to get. I wasn't sent, Claire said. I came because Samuel is my friend and I chose to. Of course you did. Vincent almost smiled. That's what makes you useful. You walked in here willingly. Gabriel will follow willingly. And by the time anyone understands what happened in this building tonight, I'll have everything I need to hand the FBI a complete case against Gabriel Moretti, take back this organization, and move on. He tilted his head. You're wondering how I know about Samuel's investigation. I already know how, she said. You had someone in the house before the break-in. You'd been studying the routines for weeks. A beat. You noticed that, he said. The camera in the back corridor, she said. The man with the cleaning supplies. The phone call at 6:18 on Thursday evening. And the parking receipt behind the radiator and The study, which you might want to tell your people to be more careful about next time they break into someone's private wing. Vincent was very still. You're more observant than I gave you credit for, he said. And for the first time, his voice had something in it that was not quite pleasantness, something lower and more careful. That's a problem. I'm going to take that as a compliment, she said. You should take it as a warning. He looked at her with the cold precision of a man who has just recalculated something important. I told Gabriel months ago that sentiment was a liability. He didn't listen. You're the proof of that. He shook his head. He saw a housekeeper. I saw the one person in that house who actually knew what was happening in every room of it. Then you should have been more careful, she said. I wasn't careful enough, Vincent agreed. I'm correcting that now. He nodded to one of the men by the door. Put her with Price. The man moved toward her, and that was when Claire started talking. Not begging, not negotiating. Talking specifically, precisely, in the voice of someone who has done their homework and wants the person across from them to understand exactly how thoroughly they have done it. Mariner Properties LLC, she said, established in 2019. Registered in Delaware, operating address in Providence. Purchased 14 buildings in East Boston between 2020 and 2022, evicted over 300 families, and then sold 9 of those buildings at a combined profit of $11 million. The holding company above Mariner is Harbor Point Capital. The holding company above Harbor Point is a trust established by the Moretti organization in 2018, 2 years before Gabriel took over the business. She looked at Vincent steadily. That trust was not Gabriel's idea. It was already in place when he inherited. And the person who set it up, who negotiated the original property purchases, who authorized the evictions, wasn't Gabriel. Vincent had gone completely still. It was you, she said. Samuel's investigation found it 3 weeks ago. He told me at dinner, the night my phone died and the car broke down, the same night you used my absence to break into the study. He told me everything he'd found, including the authorization signatures on the property acquisition documents. He told me about the name on those signatures. She paused. Your name, Vincent. The room was silent. In the glass-walled office, Samuel raised his head and looked at Vincent with the expression of a man who has just watched a carefully constructed bluff transform into something real. The evidence is copied, Claire said. Samuel scheduled it for delivery before he was taken. He has a system. If he doesn't check in by 10 o'clock, everything he's found goes to 3 separate investigators and 2 journalists. It's already in motion. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It read 9:58. You have 2 minutes to decide whether you want to stop this by releasing him, or spend those 2 minutes explaining to your men why you need them to disappear with you. Vincent looked at her. Really looked at her, not the way he'd been looking at her since she walked in, measuring and dismissing, but the way you look at something you fundamentally misjudged. You're bluffing, he said. Samuel, Claire said, raising her voice toward the glass. Did you or did you not activate the distribution protocol before you were taken? Samuel's voice came through clearly. I did. The moment I realized I was being followed. 12 hours from activation. Everything goes out automatically. So the question, Claire said, turning back to Vincent, isn't whether the evidence gets out. It's already going out. The question is whether you're standing in this building when it does, holding a federal kidnapping charge in addition to everything else, or whether you're somewhere else. Vincent's jaw was tight. The calculation behind his eyes was moving fast. She could almost see it, the columns of risk and outcome running against each other. And then the fire suppression system activated. Not the whole building. Just the east wing, the section of the warehouse that held the old electrical panel and the stacked cardboard packaging that had been there since someone forgot to remove it in the 1990s. The panel had been sparking for 20 minutes, quietly and unnoticed, while everyone's attention was elsewhere. Steel doors began to descend along the interior partition walls. Alarms erupted from every speaker in the building simultaneously. And from the emergency sprinkler heads that ran along the ceiling of the east section, a flood of pressurized water began to cascade down in a roaring white curtain. The men near the east entrance scattered. The 2 men by the main door ran toward the partition to see what was happening. Vincent turned instinctively toward the sound, because that is what you do when something loud and sudden happens. You look at it, even if looking at it costs you 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. The floor panel in the center of the warehouse opened from beneath. Gabriel came up through it first, moving fast and low. Anthony was 2 steps behind him. They had heard everything through Claire's microphone, every word, every name, Every piece of evidence she had laid on the table, like cards she'd been holding since the beginning of the game. Vincent turned back from the sprinkler chaos to find Gabriel 6 feet from him. Gabriel. His voice was controlled, but his eyes were doing something they almost never did. They were uncertain. Vincent. Gabriel's voice was the quietest Claire had ever heard it. Where's Samuel? Where's Samuel? Vincent gestured toward the office. One of his remaining men moved to intercept Gabriel, and Anthony was there before he completed the step, a brief controlled exchange that ended with the man sitting on the floor, looking confused. Gabriel crossed the room to the office door and opened it. He looked at Samuel, the zip ties, the cut above the eye, the chair. His expression did something complicated and then went flat. He looked back at Vincent. I have your confession, he said. The microphone caught everything you said to Claire, including the housing scheme, including your name on the authorization documents. He paused. Including the fact that you've been working to frame me for the last 18 months while I was trying to clean up what you built. Vincent's composure was still intact, but it was the kind of intact that takes effort visible, now in a way it hadn't been before. You wouldn't turn that over to the FBI. You'd be burying yourself. I'm prepared to have that conversation with them, Gabriel said, through my terms. Tonight, if necessary. He met Vincent's eyes. I'm not going to hurt you, Vincent. I want you to understand that. What I'm going to do is much harder for you than that. Vincent looked at him. I'm going to let the law handle it, Gabriel said. The East Wing was fully engaged now, the sprinkler system hammering the old packaging into wet ruin, the alarms still cycling in long, bright pulses. The steel partitions had separated Vincent's remaining men from the main floor. The ones at the entrance had, in the chaos, made the decision to be somewhere else, the calculation that every hired man makes when the situation shifts past the point of his pay grade. Vincent was alone. He looked at Gabriel. He looked at Anthony. He looked at Claire, who was standing near the office door, dry and composed in the middle of the noise and the spray, watching him with the expression of a woman who had already known how this ended and had been patient enough to wait for it. You let a housekeeper walk into a negotiation, he said, and there was something in his voice, not respect exactly, but a grudging acknowledgement that costs a man like Vincent more than money. She's not a housekeeper, Gabriel said. She never was. I was just the last one to understand that. Anthony had already called Gabriel's attorney, and the federal contact Gabriel had been developing for 6 months, the one he'd never used, because using it would have meant committing to a path he wasn't yet certain he was brave enough to take. He was certain now. He crossed to Samuel and cut the zip ties with a knife from his jacket. Samuel flexed his wrists, stood carefully, looked at Claire across the room. You told him everything, Samuel said. Not an accusation, just a recognition. At dinner, she said. When you explained the investigation, I didn't know then how relevant it was going to be. She paused. I'm glad I listened carefully. Samuel exhaled. He looked at Gabriel with the expression of a man who is doing a lot of reassessment at once. She's been talking about you for 3 years, he said. The job, the house. I want you to know she never said anything specific. But he stopped. She talked about the work like it mattered, like she mattered in it. Gabriel looked at Claire. She looked away, but not quickly enough. The East Wing fire was contained within 8 minutes. The suppression system had caught it before it moved past the packaging section. And the old electrical panel had burned itself out on nothing more than its own faulty wiring. The building was loud and wet and lit with emergency amber. And somewhere outside, there were sirens beginning to rise in the distance. Anthony was coordinating on the phone. Vincent was sitting on a crate, not restrained, not because Gabriel trusted him, but because he didn't need to be restrained. There was nowhere to go. And Vincent was smart enough to have calculated that already. Gabriel moved to where Claire was standing and stopped in front of her. You all right? He said. She looked at him. You? I've been better, he paused. I've also been considerably worse. He looked at her for a moment, at the collar of her coat, at the microphone line she hadn't removed yet, at the person in front of him who had walked into a building full of armed men with nothing but the truth and 3 years of careful observation and had somehow won. Claire, don't say anything that requires a response right now, she said. I'm still running on adrenaline and I'll make poor decisions. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile. Something smaller and more real. All right, later, she said. Later, he agreed. She turned back to check on Samuel, and Gabriel stood where she'd left him for a moment, watching her move through the room, steady, purposeful. Checking Samuel's wrist where the zip ties had cut, asking him quietly whether he needed a hospital. Listening to his answer with the full attention of someone who has been trained to care for people in distress and carries that training in her hands even now. In this building, in this situation, in the middle of everything. He thought about what she had said to Vincent, every detail she had cataloged, every piece she had quietly assembled, the parking receipt, the camera, the phone call at 6:18, the maintenance maps from the archives. Samuel's investigation, absorbed at dinner, and stored carefully until it was needed. He had spent 3 years paying her to keep a house, and she had spent 3 years keeping everything in it, not just the rooms, not just the schedules and the supplies and the orderly running of a large and complicated household, but the truth of it, the real texture of what happened in those walls. And when it mattered, she had walked in here, alone, and put that truth on the table, like a weapon she had been carrying for years without knowing she would need it. The sirens outside were closer now. Gabriel looked at Vincent, sitting on his crate with the closed expression of a man who has spent 11 years calculating the angles of power and has finally miscalculated one. "You told me sentiment was a liability," Gabriel said. Vincent said nothing. "You were half right," Gabriel said. "Misplaced sentiment is a liability." But he glanced back at Claire across the room. "The right kind is something else entirely." He turned away from Vincent and did not look at him again. Across the building, the east wing door was beginning to buckle from the heat of the smoldering packaging behind it. Claire looked up from where she was sitting with Samuel and met Gabriel's eyes across 40 feet of wet concrete and amber light and the sound of sirens arriving at the pier entrance. She mouthed 2 words. He read them. He nodded once. Outside, the Boston night was cold and clear, and the harbor was black and enormous. And everything that was about to happen next was going to be very hard and cost a great deal and take a very long time. Gabriel Moretti had never been more certain of anything in his life. He walked toward the door, and behind him, Claire Bennett helped Samuel Price to his feet, and together they walked out of Pier 19 and into whatever came next. The federal agents arrived at Pier 19 at 10:17 in the evening. There were 6 of them, plus 2 from the Boston field office, who had been working the housing fraud case for the better part of a year without knowing whose money they were actually following. Gabriel's attorney, a precise and unflappable woman named Margaret Chen, who had been woken from sleep and arrived looking like she had never slept in her life, was already there when they pulled up. She had a recorder running. She had a stack of documents that Gabriel had handed her through the car window before he walked into the building. Documents he had prepared 3 months ago and kept in a sealed envelope in her office, safe with the instruction that she was to open it if he ever called her after 9 in the evening without saying hello first. He had called her at 9:41. He had not said hello. Margaret stood between Gabriel and the federal agents, the way a wall stands between a building and the weather, not threatening, not aggressive, simply immovable and very clearly present. "My client is here voluntarily," she said before anyone asked. "He has evidence relevant to an ongoing investigation and wishes to provide it in a structured cooperation agreement. He will not be speaking informally tonight. If you want what he has, you do it right." The lead agent, a woman named Reyes who had the kind of face that gave nothing away, looked at Gabriel steadily. Gabriel looked back at her. "Vincent Hale," he said. "He's inside. He abducted a federal witness and was planning to use stolen documents to obstruct justice and frame me for crimes he committed. The witness is Samuel Price. He's unharmed. My attorney has a recorded confession and a chain of evidence that will take you approximately 48 hours to fully process." He paused. "And I have 18 months of financial records that will show you everything the Moretti organization has been doing and everything I've been trying to stop it from doing. I am prepared to give you all of it." Reyes studied him. "That's a significant offer." "It comes with conditions," Margaret said, "which we will discuss in a formal setting with everything on the record." "Of course it does," Reyes said. She looked at Gabriel one more time, the kind of look that is trying to measure the distance between what a man is saying and what he means. Then she nodded to her team, and they moved past him into the building. Gabriel watched them go. He heard from inside the sound of Vincent's voice controlled. At first, then less so as the reality of the situation assembled itself around him. He heard Margaret say quietly beside him, "You understand what tonight starts?" "Yes," he said. "It will take months, possibly years. You will lose the organization, most of the money, the house, the reputation." She paused. "Everything your father built." "My father built something I spent 18 months trying to dismantle," Gabriel said. "I don't think I'll miss it the way he expected." Margaret made a small sound that might have been approval. She went back inside. Gabriel turned around. Claire was 20 feet away, standing at the edge of the pier with Samuel beside her. Samuel was wrapped in a jacket that Anthony had produced from somewhere, holding a paper cup of something warm, looking like a man who has had a very long night and is only now beginning to understand that it's over. Claire had her hand on his arm, not holding him up, just present in the way she was present with people who needed steadiness, and she was talking to him quietly, too low for Gabriel to hear. Gabriel walked toward them. Samuel saw him coming first. His expression did something complicated, the particular complexity of a man who has spent 3 years hearing about someone secondhand and is now standing across from the reality of them after a very unusual evening. "Mr. Moretti," Samuel said. Samuel Gabriel stopped at a respectful distance. "How's the eye?" Samuel touched the cut above his eyebrow. "I've had worse. Grad school was rough." He looked at Gabriel with the directness of a man who investigates people for a living and is currently conducting an involuntary investigation. "Claire told me what she did in there, what she said. She handled herself considerably better than most trained people I know," Gabriel said. "She's been doing that since I met her," Samuel said. He glanced at Claire, then back at Gabriel. "She's also the most stubborn human being I have ever encountered in my life, and I say that having known her for 12 years, so I want you to understand the sample size." He paused. "She's going to do what she's decided to do, whatever that is." Case that wasn't clear yet. "It was clear," Gabriel said, "some time ago." Samuel nodded slowly. He looked at the harbor for a moment, then at Gabriel again. "The housing scheme. Mariner Properties. We're going to get into that in detail with investigators," Gabriel said. "But I want to tell you directly, I did not know the specific structure of that operation when I inherited it. I am not telling you that to avoid responsibility. I am telling you because the investigation deserves accurate information, and because the people who were displaced deserve the truth about who made those decisions." He held Samuel's gaze. "I'm going to make it right, not as a legal strategy, because it's the right thing to do." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. "You know that's what she said you'd say." Gabriel looked at Claire. "What else did she say?" "She said she wasn't sure yet whether you meant it." Samuel finished the last of his hot drink. "For what it's worth, the way you came through that floor panel when the alarms went off, instead of staying in the tunnel and waiting, that was either very stupid or very genuine. I haven't decided which." "Probably both," Gabriel said. Samuel almost smiled. "Probably both." Claire had been listening to all of this without speaking, which was a particular skill of hers, the ability to be entirely present and entirely quiet at the same time. Now she looked at Gabriel and said, "Anthony wants you." "Something about the attorney." Gabriel nodded. He looked at Samuel once more. "Someone will take you to get that eye looked at. Thank you for what you said in there about the distribution protocol." "I wasn't lying," Samuel said. "It really was activated. Everything really did go out at 10 o'clock. "I know," Gabriel said. "That's why I'm thanking you." He walked back toward the building, and Claire watched him go, and Samuel watched Claire watch him go, and then Samuel said, "So, in the particular tone of a man who has known someone for 12 years and has a question he's been holding for approximately 45 minutes. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were about to say several things." "I was going to say one thing," Samuel said, "which is that you are the most aggressively self-aware person I have ever met. And you have clearly been thinking about this man for considerably longer than tonight. And I just want you to know that watching you walk into that building was the most frightening thing I have experienced in my adult life. And also," he paused, "also it was extraordinary. And whatever you decide to do next, I'm on your side." Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My side includes finishing nursing school. I know, and leaving the house, the job, and doing this on my own terms, in my own time, without anyone deciding for me." "Claire." Samuel looked at her gently. "I know, I've known you for 12 years. He put his arm around her shoulders briefly, a familiar and fond gesture. "I'm just saying, the way he looked at you when you walked out of that building. You don't have to decide anything right now, but you should probably know what it looked like from the outside." She looked at the harbor. "What did it look like?" she said quietly. "Like a man who just understood what he almost lost," Samuel said, "and couldn't believe he'd been standing next to it for 3 years without knowing." She didn't answer. But she didn't look away from the harbor either, and Samuel, who had known her for 12 years, understood that her not answering was its own kind of answer. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Gabriel Moretti's life, and he had not lived an easy one. The cooperation agreement took 11 days to negotiate. Margaret Chen slept approximately 4 hours a night during those 11 days and billed accordingly. Gabriel surrendered the financial records, the communication logs, the ledger, everything. He gave them names, dates, accounts, structures, the architecture of 18 months of attempted restructuring, and the full picture of what had existed before it. He also gave them Vincent's confession, which the microphone had captured in its entirety, and which Samuel's separately activated distribution protocol had already delivered to 2 federal investigators and 1 journalist by 10:15 the night of the Pier. Vincent was arrested on charges that Margaret described, with professional understatement, as substantial. Several of his associates followed within the week. The housing fraud case, which Samuel had been building for almost a year, became the most visible part of the public story. The 300 families, the shell corporations, the $11 million in profit. It ran on the front page for 4 days. Gabriel's name appeared in every article. He read all of them. He did not ask Margaret to issue a statement of innocence. He did not hire a publicist. He read the articles and sat with what it felt like to have 18 months of private effort described in public as the actions of a man attempting to avoid consequences. He sat with the knowledge that from the outside, the distinction between attempting to clean up an operation and running it was not obvious and might never be. He sat with the fact that this was the cost of the thing and that the cost was legitimate. His captains came to him in the 3rd week. Not all of them, some had already disappeared in the direction of other arrangements. The particular disappearing act that men in that world perform when the leadership becomes inconvenient. But 4 of them sat across from him in Margot's conference room and told him, with varying degrees of directness, that what he was doing was a betrayal, that he was dismantling something that had taken decades to build. That loyalty meant something, and he was destroying it. Gabriel listened to all of it. Then he said, "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what's happening so you can make your own decisions. The organization as it existed is over. The legitimate shipping company will continue under court supervision. If you want to be part of that real work, real contracts, real wages, I'll find a place for you. If you don't, I understand left." 2 stayed. Gabriel considered that a reasonable ratio for the end of a chapter. The mansion was surrendered in the 5th week. It went toward the restitution fund, the legal mechanism Gabriel and Margaret had structured to compensate the displaced tenants of the 14 East Boston buildings. The amount was not enough. Gabriel said this to Margaret when she presented the final numbers, and she said, very evenly, "No, but it's what you have." "I have personal assets," he said. "The offshore accounts from before the restructuring." Margaret looked at him carefully. "Gabriel, those accounts would be difficult to trace." "No one is asking." "I know no one is asking," he said. "I'm offering." He looked at the numbers on the table. "How much more would we need to restore the buildings to habitable condition and establish a resident-controlled trust?" Margaret ran the calculation. She told him. He looked at the number. "Do it," he said. She looked at him over her reading glasses. "That will leave you with, I know what it'll leave me with, a modest apartment and a salary from the shipping company that is, if I'm being precise, considerably less than you paid your housekeeper." "I know." She studied him for a long moment. Then she took off her reading glasses and set them on the table. "Your father would be furious," she said. "Yes," Gabriel said. "He would." She put her glasses back on. "All right, I'll structure it." Claire came to the mansion on a Tuesday in the 3rd week to collect her personal things. Gabriel was there. He had not arranged to be there. He had been in the house, dealing with the inventory process that preceded the sale, and when he heard her car on the drive, his first instinct was to go somewhere else in the house, to give her the privacy of collecting her things without an audience. His second instinct, which arrived approximately 3 seconds later, was to stop performing emotional cowardice and go downstairs. He found her in the kitchen. She was packing her small collection of cookbooks, 3 of them, worn paperbacks she kept on the shelf above the counter, and a ceramic mug she had brought from her apartment years ago and never taken back, and a photograph she had pinned to the inside of the pantry door, which she always said she put there to make the space feel less industrial and which Gabriel had never asked about. He looked at it now as she carefully unpinned it. Her mother, young, laughing at what looked like a picnic. "She looks like you," he said. Claire turned. She had not heard him come in, or maybe she had, and had chosen not to react until she was ready. Hard to tell with her. "She was funnier than me," she said. Louder. Took up more space. She folded the photograph carefully and tucked it into her bag. She would have had an opinion about all of this. A good one or a bad one? Complicated one. She always had complicated opinions about men who knew they were wrong and did something about it. Claire set her bag on the counter and looked at the kitchen, the room she had worked in for 3 years. Every surface familiar, every cabinet door opening at exactly the right angle, every drawer knowing where it kept its contents. She would have said you were late. I was late, Gabriel said. Yes, she looked at him. You were. He moved to the table and sat down, which felt strange now that the kitchen was half dismantled, and the things that made it a room were leaving it piece by piece. I have something for you, he said. She waited. He took an envelope from his jacket and set it on the table. Final wages. And a letter. It describes your work accurately, your intelligence, your organizational skills, your leadership under pressure. The people at the nursing school financial aid office that Samuel introduced you to will probably find it useful. He looked at the envelope. I wrote it carefully. She picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. Thank you. I also want to tell you something that's not in the letter. He looked at her steadily. You saved my life at that pier. Not the physical version of my life. I probably would have survived the evening one way or another. But the version of my life that was worth anything. The direction of it. You did that. He paused. I want you to know I understand that, and I'm not taking it lightly. Claire was quiet. She held the envelope in both hands and looked at the table, and there was something on her face that was very close to the surface and that she was managing carefully, the way she managed most things. Gabriel, she said. Yes, I'm going to say something, and I need you to hear it without trying to fix it. All right. I'm not leaving because I don't. She stopped. Started again. I'm leaving because if there is ever going to be something real between us, I cannot be the person who lives in your house and works for you and is financially dependent on you while we figure out what that is. I can't build something genuine from inside an imbalance. She looked up at him. Do you understand the difference? Yes, he said. I do. I need to become the person I've been trying to become. Nursing school. The clinic. My own apartment, my own income, my own life that I built because I chose to, not because I stayed somewhere convenient. She was very steady, which was costing her something. He could see where it was costing. That's not a rejection. I need you to know that. I know, he said. I don't want you to wait. She said. I want you to build your own thing. The legitimate company. The smaller life. All of it. Build that because it's the right thing, not because you're waiting for me at the end of it. And if after all of that, he said, we end up at the same table again. She looked at him for a long moment. Then we'll see what we've built, she said, and we'll go from there. She picked up her bag. She paused at the door of the kitchen and looked back at the room, at the stove, the shelves, the counter where she had made approximately 10,000 cups of tea over 3 years, at the table where they had argued and been honest and sat in the dark and found mud on white marble and changed the direction of 2 lives over the course of a single sleepless week. Gabriel, she said. Yes, don't stand in the dark anymore. She looked at him. Turn a light on. She walked out of the kitchen. He heard her footsteps cross the foyer, heard the front door open and close, heard the car engine start at the end of the drive. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he got up, turned the kitchen light on, and went back to work. The months that followed were not dramatic. That was the thing about real change. It didn't look like anything from the outside. It looked like a man in a modest apartment near the harbor waking up at 6 in the morning and going to work at a legitimate shipping office and making decisions about freight contracts instead of criminal operations. It looked like attendance at a Thursday evening group at a downtown counseling center where a therapist named Dr. Rivera had the kind of patient and unimpressed manner that Gabriel had initially found irritating and had come to understand was the thing that made her effective. It looked like insomnia improving from every night to twice a week, and then once, and then not at all. It looked like Anthony showing up at the office every morning and saying, "Morning," and Gabriel saying, "Morning," and both of them getting on with the ordinary business of running something honest, which turned out to be significantly less complicated than running something that required violence and was significantly harder in every other way. The shipping company had 12 employees by the 3rd month. Real contracts, signed agreements, health coverage that Gabriel had insisted on over the objection of the accountant who said the margins couldn't support it. Gabriel had looked at the accountant and said, "Then we find better margins." And the accountant had gone away and found better margins. Because that was what happened when the person running the business decided that certain things were not negotiable. Gabriel went to counseling every week. He sat with Dr. Rivera in a room that was not large or impressive and talked about his father and fear and the particular way that men who learn early that vulnerability is dangerous spend their entire adult lives performing invulnerability until they've forgotten where the performance ends and the person begins. "What are you afraid of right now?" Dr. Rivera asked him in the 8th session. He thought about it honestly, which he was getting better at. That I left it too late, he said. That by the time I became someone worth choosing, the choice won't be available. Is that within your control? No, then what is within your control? He looked at the window. Becoming someone worth choosing anyway, whether or not the choice gets made. Dr. Rivera made a small note and said good, in a tone that meant she was going to push on this more next week. He was getting better at being pushed on. Claire, in the meantime, was doing exactly what she had said she was going to do. The nursing program was harder than she remembered from the first time, before her mother's illness had pulled her out of it. The material was denser, the clinical hours longer, the particular exhaustion of being a returning student in her 30s, among people who were 10 years younger and had not yet learned how much they didn't know. But she had always been the kind of person who got more precise under pressure rather than less, and the program, it turned out, recognized that quality. She worked 2 days a week at the community clinic in East Boston, the 3 blocks from the apartment buildings that were being restored under the resident trust Gabriel's restitution fund had helped establish. She had taken the position because it paid, and because it was good clinical experience, and because East Boston was the neighborhood at the center of everything that had happened. And she felt, without being able to fully articulate it, that being there was a form of completion. She did not avoid thinking about Gabriel. She had decided early in the separation that avoiding the thought of someone was its own kind of preoccupation, that it took more energy to not think about a person than to simply allow the thought and let it move through. So she thought about him when she thought about him, and she noticed as the months passed that the thoughts changed quality. Early on, they were complicated, tangled up with the events of that week, with the mud on the marble and the dark foyer and the fire suppression system and everything that had cracked open between them. Later, they became simpler. She would be walking to the clinic in the morning, and she would think, I wonder if he's sleeping better. And the thought had in it the particular quality of genuine caring about a specific person, rather than the complicated weight of unresolved things. She got coffee, sometime with Samuel, who was finishing his investigation report, had been called to testify twice, and was handling the mild celebrity of being a financial fraud investigator who had survived a kidnapping with characteristic Samuelness, which was to say he found the whole thing embarrassing and refused to make it a story. Have you talked to him? Samuel asked her on a Tuesday morning in the 5th month. No, she said. When I'm ready. And when will you be ready? She considered the question seriously, rather than deflecting, which was the thing Samuel had always been able to get from her that most people couldn't. When I don't need to be, she said. Samuel looked at her over his coffee cup. That's either very wise or very complicated. Probably both, she said. He smiled. Probably both, he agreed. The apartment buildings in East Boston opened in the 8th month formally, with a ceremony that none of the major papers covered in full, but that mattered enormously to the 300 families who had been displaced and the several dozen who had been able to return. The resident trust took ownership of the management structure. The buildings had new roofs, restored heating systems, repainted hallways, and leases with actual legal protections. Gabriel was not at the ceremony. He had funded a significant portion of the restoration through the restitution structure, but he had asked Margaret specifically to ensure his name was not attached to the event in any public way. This isn't mine to take credit for, he had told her. It's theirs to have back. Margaret had looked at him over her glasses and said, all right, in the tone she used when something surprised her and she didn't want to say so. He knew about the ceremony because Anthony mentioned it, and because Samuel texted him a photograph, just one, taken from the back of the crowd, of people standing in front of a building that looked a building where people could actually live, rather than a building designed to extract money from people who had no other options. Gabriel looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to his freight contracts. In the 9th month, he saw Claire. He did not plan it. He was at the clinic, the East Boston Community Clinic, because one of his shipping employees had been in an accident at the dock, and Gabriel had driven him there himself, because that was the kind of thing you did when you ran a business the right way and you understood that people were people and not assets. He was sitting in the waiting area while Martinez had his hand looked at, and he was reading a freight scheduling document on his phone, and the door to one of the examination rooms opened. Claire walked out. She was in scrubs, pale blue, with the clinic's logo on the chest pocket. Her hair was up. She was carrying a tablet and talking to an older man who was nodding seriously at whatever she was telling him. And she had the focused and present quality of someone doing work they were made for. She had not seen Gabriel. He sat very still and made the decision. In approximately 2 seconds, he was not going to call her name. He was not going to cross the waiting room. He was going to sit here and let her finish her conversation, and if she saw him, she saw him. And if she didn't, she didn't. And either way was okay. She finished her conversation with the older patient and walked him back toward the exit, and as she turned back toward the nurse's station, she looked up. She saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she walked toward him, not hurrying, not performing casualness, just walking toward him the way she did everything directly, with intention. Gabriel, she said. He stood. One of my employees. Dock accident, his hand. She looked at the door that Martinez had gone through. Is he okay? I think so. He'll need an x-ray. We have a good imaging tech on today. She looked back at Gabriel. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment that lasted exactly the right amount of time, to be honest, without being dramatic. You look good, he said. You look tired, she said. I'm sleeping better than I was. She looked at him with the particular precision she always had. You're different. Am I? Yes. She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was deciding on the right word. Quieter. But not the closed kind of quiet, the other kind. The other kind, he repeated. The kind that means something settled, she said, instead of something shut down. He looked at her for a moment. I've been seeing a therapist, he said. Every week. Something moved across her face. Not surprised she would not have been surprised. Something warmer. Good, she said. That's good, Gabriel. She's very patient, he said. And very unimpressed with me, which I've decided is probably the most useful thing. Claire almost smiled. The almost was doing a lot of work. I should get back, she said. She gestured vaguely toward the nurse's station. Of course. He paused. Claire, she waited. I'm not going to ask you anything. I just want you to know that what you said, when you left the house, I heard it. All of it. And I'm doing the thing you asked me to do. Building the right thing because it's right, not because I'm waiting. He looked at her steadily. Just, I want you to know that. She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was very calm and very careful, and underneath all of that, very much not either of those things. I know, she said, I can see it. She walked back toward the nurse's station, and Gabriel sat down, and 5 minutes later, Martinez came out of the examination room with 2 fractured fingers, a splint, and strict instructions from the very good imaging tech. And Gabriel drove him home and helped him figure out the workers' compensation paperwork, and did not think about the fact that Claire had said, I can see it. He thought about it later, alone in his apartment, with the harbor sounds coming through the window and the light on, always the light on. Now, ever since a woman in a damp navy dress had told him to stop standing in the dark, he thought about it, and what he felt was not the desperate, grasping urgency of someone who needed something from outside of himself to feel complete. It was something quieter, something that could wait. That, he decided, was probably what changing actually felt like. Not a dramatic transformation, not a moment where everything was different. Just a Tuesday evening in the 9th month where you sat in your apartment and felt the difference between someone from a place of emptiness and wanting someone from a place of fullness, the difference between needing a person to make you whole and choosing a person because you already were. He turned the lamp on the desk to its lowest setting and opened the freight contracts for tomorrow. And for the first time in 11 years, the quiet in the room was just quiet. The rain came back to Boston on a Thursday evening in the 12th month, the particular kind of October rain that doesn't announce itself, no thunder, no dramatic shift in the sky, just a quiet settling of water against the city that you notice only when you're already in it. Claire noticed it when she stepped out of the university building after her clinical examination and realized she had left her umbrella at the clinic 3 days ago and had been meaning to retrieve it ever since. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the wet sidewalk, doing the calculation every person does in that situation. How far, how bad, how much do I actually care? She decided she didn't care. She had been waiting 12 months for this particular evening. A little rain was not going to diminish it. She walked into it. The examination had taken 3 hours. She had known, walking out, that she had passed not because she was overconfident, but because she had prepared in the specific and methodical way she prepared for everything, and because the material had stopped feeling like information she was trying to remember, and started feeling like something she actually knew, which was the difference between studying and learning, and she had been aware of the shift when it happened, back in the 7th month, sitting at her kitchen table at 11 in the evening, with a cold cup of tea and a pharmacology textbook and the sudden understanding that she was not grinding anymore. She was doing something she was built for. She had called Samuel from the sidewalk outside the university before she even wiped the rain off her face. "I passed," she said when he picked up. "Of course you did," he said immediately. "I've been telling you that for 6 months." "Did you pass well?" "I don't know what that means." "It means, did you just pass or did you demonstrate to everyone in that room that you were the most prepared person there?" She thought about the examining board's faces at the end. The particular quality of the nod the lead examiner had given her. "The second one," she said. Samuel made a sound that was half triumph and half the long exhale of someone who has been quietly anxious on behalf of another person for longer than he's admitted. "Go celebrate, eat something, call your mother's picture." "I already did," she said, while I was waiting for the result. "What did she say?" Claire smiled, rain on her face. "She said she knew." She was still smiling when she ended the call. She stood on the wet sidewalk outside the university, in the rain, in her good coat, the dark one, the same one, the one she had now worn to 3 of the most significant evenings of her life. And she thought about what came next. She had 2 things on her schedule for the rest of the evening. The first was stopping by Gabriel's office. She had known for several weeks that she was going to do this. Not because she had made a dramatic decision or reached a grand conclusion, but because she had arrived quietly and without ceremony at the understanding that she was ready. Not ready in the sense of having resolved every complexity or answered every question. Ready in the sense that she was fully herself, finished nursing school, working at the clinic, living in her own apartment, managing her own money, making her own choices every day without reference to anyone else's approval or disapproval. And from that place of being fully herself, she wanted to see him. She wanted to see him the way you want something when you're whole, not the way you want something when you're empty. She had promised herself she would know the difference when it arrived, and she knew it. The second thing on her schedule was takeout. She had already ordered it. 2 containers of the Thai food from the place on Harbor Street that was not expensive and not impressive and made the best tom kha in the city. She picked it up on the way, still rain damp, carrying it in a paper bag that was immediately threatening to go soft at the bottom. She took the stairs to his office rather than the elevator because she needed the 30 seconds. At the top of the stairs, she stopped. She adjusted the bag. She stood there for a moment in the stairwell outside the 3rd floor door and did the things she had done before walking into Pier. 12 months ago, she took one breath, slow and full, and then she opened the door and walked through it. The shipping office was a different world from the waterfront mansion. Smaller, plainer, the kind of space that says we do real work here and we don't have money to spend on anything else. There was a front area where 2 of the staff were still at their desks, even at this hour, and both of them looked up when she came in and then looked at each other with the particular expression of people who have been anticipating something and are now watching it happen. "Is he in?" she said, to the one on the left whose name she had learned was Carla. "He's always in," Carla said. "Second door on the right." She paused. "He doesn't know you're coming." "I know," Claire said. "That's intentional." Carla looked at the takeout bag. She looked at Claire's rain-damp hair and her good coat, and the particular quality of calm in her face that was doing only partial justice to what was happening underneath it. She smiled a small, warm, entirely unprofessional smile and said, "Good." Claire walked to the second door on the right and knocked twice. "Come in," Gabriel said from inside. She opened the door. He was at his desk, a real desk, practical and plain, covered with what were very clearly actual shipping documents and not anything that required a coded ledger or a locked drawer. He was in his shirt sleeves, no jacket, tie loosened, reading something on his laptop with the focused expression of a man who is genuinely engaged with what he's doing. There was a mug of coffee at his elbow that had gone cold 2 hours ago, which she knew because she had been making his coffee for 3 years, and she knew exactly what his coffee looked like at every stage of being forgotten. He looked up. He looked at her. For a moment, he didn't say anything, and she could see him doing the thing that people do when something they've been hoping for appears without warning, the brief involuntary recalibration, the checking of whether it was real. "Claire," he said. "I passed my clinical examination today," she said. "First attempt. Full marks on the pharmacology section, which everyone said was the hardest part." She held up the paper bag. "I brought dinner." He looked at the bag. He looked at her. He stood up from his desk, and the motion had in it nothing of the controlled authority she had spent 3 years watching him deploy. It was just a man standing up because the person he wanted to see had walked into his office and he didn't want to be sitting down for it. You passed, he said. I passed. Full marks on pharmacology. Don't make it a thing. It was just a section I prepared most for. Claire, he said, and his voice was doing something she had only heard it do a handful of times. All of them in kitchens or in crisis, never in ordinary moments, which was why this particular ordinary moment felt so enormous. That's extraordinary. She set the takeout on the edge of his desk. She pulled her coat off and draped it over the chair, across from the visitor's chair. Plain, no leather. Nothing like the chairs in the mansion study, and she looked at him steadily. How are you? She said. Really said it. The way she said things when she meant the whole question. He considered it. She noticed that he considered it now rather than deflecting, which was new. Or not new, it had been building over 12 months. This ability to receive a genuine question and give it a genuine answer, rather than reaching immediately for the managed version. Good, he said, actually good, not performing good. He paused. The company has 18 employees now. We got a Port Authority contract last month, legitimate harbor logistics for the city docks. Anthony negotiated it. He's better at that than I am. He looked at the papers on his desk. I went back to Dr. Rivera last week, even though I felt like I didn't need to, because she told me in the beginning that feeling like you don't need to is exactly when you should go. Is she still unimpressed with you? Claire said. Slightly less so. I think that's progress. It is, she said. She looked at the takeout containers. Do you have plates, or are we doing this from the containers? I have 2 plates, he said. I think. I haven't checked recently. Then go find out. He went and found out. He came back with 2 plates and 2 forks, and a look on his face that was working very hard to be ordinary and not entirely succeeding, and they sat him at his desk, her in the visitor's chair, the takeout between them. And for the first 10 minutes, they talked about the food, which was excellent, and about the nursing program, and about the Port Authority contract, and about Samuel, who had finished his investigation report and was being profiled in a financial journalism publication, and was handling this with the same embarrassed reluctance he brought to everything that drew attention to him. And then, because this was Claire and Gabriel, and they had never been good at staying on the surface of things, when the real things were right there, Gabriel set his fork down and said, "Why tonight?" She looked at him. Not a complaint, he said quickly. Not even a question that needs an answer. Stop. I've been waiting for you to be ready. However long that took. I meant what I said in that clinic waiting room, that I wasn't waiting in a way that was putting pressure on you. I wasn't. But I want to know, if you're willing to tell me, what tonight is. She was quiet for a moment. She appreciated that he'd said not a question that needs an answer. Because it was true, he wasn't demanding an accounting. He was asking the way you ask someone you care about something real, with the understanding that they might choose not to answer, and you'll respect that. She chose to answer. I've been thinking about something you said at the pier, she said. When you were talking to Vincent, you said I can't protect you by controlling you. I can only become someone you don't need protection from. She looked at him. And I've been thinking about whether that was true. Whether you actually meant it, or whether it was something you said in a crisis that felt true in the moment and then faded when the crisis was over. She paused. I've been watching this year, from a distance, the company, the restitution fund, the therapy, the way Anthony talks about working for you now versus how people used to talk about it. She held his gaze. You meant it. Gabriel was very still. Yes, he said. I meant to know. She picked up her fork again. That's why I'm here. And something shifted in the room, not dramatically, not with the urgency of a crisis or the weight of a confrontation, but with the quiet, enormous shift of something that has been held in suspension for a very long time, finally settling into its right position. They finished dinner. The rain was heavier against the window now, and the office had gotten quieter as the 2 staff in the front finished their work and left. And it was just the 2 of them, and the sound of the city outside, and the ordinary mess of takeout containers on a work desk. Gabriel collected the containers and disposed of them and came back and sat at his desk. And Claire was still in the visitor's chair. And he looked at her with the expression of a man who has something to say and is figuring out how to say it without getting it wrong. I owe you an apology, he said, a real one, not a crisis one. She waited. The night you came home at 2 a.m, he said. I stood in the dark for 3 hours waiting for you, and when you walked through the door, I made you feel like a suspect. I interrogated you. I disguised my fear as authority, and I made you justify yourself to me in your own home, the home you worked in, that you kept running, that you made functional every single day. He looked at the desk. You had done nothing wrong. You had been at dinner with a friend, and his car broke down, and you'd been stranded in the cold for 90 minutes. And you walked in the door, and instead of asking if you were okay, I demanded an explanation. Gabriel, finish, he said, not harshly, quietly. I also spent 3 years benefiting from everything you did in that house without once asking what you wanted, what you were working toward, whether you were happy. I knew you were repaying your mother's medical debt. I knew you were thinking about nursing school because I'd overheard you once on the phone. I knew in the vague way you know things about people when you're paying half attention, that you had a whole interior life that had nothing to do with me. He looked up at her, and I never asked. Because asking would have required acknowledging that you were a full person with your own direction and your own future. And I think some part of me was afraid of what that meant. The rain outside punctuated the silence. That night, he continued, when you asked me whether I was afraid something had happened to my housekeeper, or afraid you might build a life that didn't include me, I couldn't answer you. Because both things were true, and the second one was the one I was more afraid of. And I didn't know how to want something from a place of fear instead of strength. I didn't know the difference yet. He paused. I know the difference now. Claire looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the man across the desk, not the man of the waterfront mansion, not the man whose name made people step back, not the man who had stood in a dark foyer at 2 a.m. and made her justify herself, but the man in the plain office with the cold coffee and the 18 employees and the Thursday evening freight contracts, who had spent a year becoming someone different and had done it without anyone watching and without any guarantee it would matter. I forgive you, she said. I want you to know that clearly and without condition. I forgive you. He exhaled. It was not dramatic. It was the sound of something that has been carried for a long time being set down. Thank you, he said. And I want to say something too, she said. I wasn't entirely fair to you either. I saw what you were doing, the restructuring, the attempt to clean up the organization, and when I found out about the housing scheme, I told you that you didn't get credit for ignoring the damage just because you didn't personally order it. And I meant that. I still mean it. She looked at him steadily. But I also know that you were trying, in the middle of an impossible situation, with imperfect information, to do something genuinely difficult. And I was harder on you than I needed to be in some moments. Not wrong, but harder. She paused. I'm saying that because fairness goes both directions. Gabriel looked at her. You don't owe me that. I know I don't. That's why it means something. She looked at her hands on the desk, then back at him. We're starting over. Not pretending the last year didn't happen, all of it. The good and the bad and the complicated. But from here as equals, as people who know each other and have earned that knowing. She held his gaze. If that's what you want. Yes, he said. It came out very simply, the way the truest things often did. That's what I want. She nodded. She looked at the clock on his wall. It read 8:47. I should let you finish your work, she said. I'm finished, he said immediately. She looked at the papers on his desk. I'll finish them tomorrow, he said. They'll be there tomorrow. They always are. She almost smiled. There's the other thing I wanted to ask you, she said. Yes, next Friday, dinner. A real dinner. Not takeout from a bag. Not an occasion. Just dinner. A restaurant, 7 o'clock. She looked at him. No security detail. No tracking. No emergency protocols. Gabriel looked at her for a moment that contained a great deal. Then he said very carefully, is this the part where I ask whether I need to be somewhere else afterward? She looked at him. He looked back. And then Claire Bennett, who had walked through a dark foyer at 2 a.m. and found a man waiting in the shadows and refused to be afraid of him, who had found a parking receipt behind a radiator and understood its significance, who had walked into a pier full of armed men with nothing but the truth and 3 years of paying attention, who had left a mansion and rebuilt her life from the ground up without apology or drama. This woman smiled. A full, real, unguarded smile. The kind he had heard from the kitchen when he was down the hall. The kind he had spent 3 years pretending not to listen for. No interrogation this time, she said. Something in Gabriel's face, something that had been carefully managed and controlled for 11 years, let go all at once. Not dramatically. Not visibly to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But she was always paying attention. No, he said. Your time belongs to you. She stood and picked up her coat. He stood too, and they walked together to the office door, through the empty front area where Carla had left the overhead lights on dim, out into the stairwell. He walked her down to the street because it was raining, and it was late, and that was what you did. And when they got to the door, he pushed it open and held it, and she stepped out into the Boston October rain and turned up her collar. She looked at the street for a moment, and then she looked back at him. Gabriel. Yes, she stepped forward and kissed him. It was not long, it was not urgent. It was the particular kind of kiss that says, I have thought about this, and I am certain, and I am choosing it deliberate, gentle, complete. When she stepped back, the rain was on both their faces. Next Friday, she said, 7 o'clock, and this time it really is just dinner. She walked to the cab that had been waiting, opened the door, and got in. Through the window, she watched him standing in the doorway of his ordinary office building on his ordinary street, rain on his shoulders, not moving, not following, not calling after her, not doing any of the things the old version of him would have done, just watching her go, with his hands at his sides and his face open in the dark and the light from the office behind him. The cab pulled out into traffic and the office building disappeared behind the corner, and Claire faced forward and let out a long, quiet breath that had in it everything the last 12 months had cost her and given her: the sleepless nights in the nursing program, the clinical hours at the clinic, the apartment that was hers and only hers, the Tuesday morning coffee with Samuel, the passing of an examination she had first attempted years ago before life pulled her sideways, the slow and unglamorous business of becoming the fullest version of herself. She had done it. She had done all of it. Not for him, and not to spite him, and not to prove anything to anyone but for herself, from herself, with the quiet and non-negotiable conviction that she deserved to be whole before she chose to share herself with anyone. And now she was whole, and she had chosen. Back on the street, Gabriel Moretti stood in the doorway of his office building and watched the cab's taillights disappear into the rain and the traffic and the enormous ordinary life of the city, and he felt something he had not been able to identify the last time he'd watched her leave, the night she'd driven away from the mansion, a year ago, taking her cookbooks and her photograph and her collected knowledge of every room in his house. That night he had felt the specific ache of a man who understands, too late and all at once, the shape of what he has been standing next to without seeing. Tonight, he felt something different, something that had no ache in it, or had an ache of a different kind, the kind that belongs to wanting something you're allowed to want, that you're working toward, that is moving toward you at the same time. He went back upstairs. He sat at his desk. He looked at the freight contracts that he had said he would finish tomorrow, and then he picked them up and finished them tonight, because he was the kind of man who kept his word now, including to himself, and because the work was real and it was his, and he was genuinely good at it in a way that still surprised him sometimes. He drank the cold coffee. He made a note to get new coffee before the staff arrived in the morning. He answered 3 emails that had been waiting. He checked the Port Authority schedule for next week and found a timing conflict that Anthony had not noticed and resolved it in 11 minutes. At 11:15, he turned off the desk lamp, put on his jacket, locked the office, and walked down the stairs and out into the street. The rain had eased to something lighter now, more mist than rain, the kind that you feel on your face more than you see. He walked toward his apartment, which was 8 minutes away on foot, because he almost always walked rather than drove now, unless the weather made it impossible. Because he had discovered in the last year that walking was the thing that organized his thinking in a way that sitting in a car did not. He passed the harbor on the way. He always did. The route took him along the water for 2 blocks before turning inland. He stopped for a moment, the way he did sometimes, and looked at it. The harbor at night was dark and wide, and the lights of the city reflected in it in long wobbling lines of amber and white, and the air off the water was cold and clean and smelled of salt and distance. He had grown up on the edge of this water. He had watched his father conduct business on these piers, had absorbed the lesson, early and completely, that power meant fear, and fear meant safety, and safety meant control. He had spent 20 years living by that lesson before the cost of it became visible. Before a woman in a navy dress had stood in his kitchen at 2 in the morning and told him the true thing instead of the managed version, and asked him a question he couldn't answer, and started something that had taken 12 months to arrive at this moment. He looked at the harbor for a moment longer. Then he walked home. He left the light on, not because he had forgotten, and not out of habit, and not because he was afraid of the dark. He left it on because he had made a decision a year ago in a kitchen after a woman told him to stop standing in the dark, that the light was better, that openness was better, that a life built on visibility rather than shadow was harder and smaller and more expensive and worth every single thing it cost. He had paid the cost, all of it, and then some. And next Friday at 7 o'clock, he was going to sit across a table from the person who had seen the worst of him and the beginning of the better, and they were going to have dinner. A real dinner with no guards and no protocols and no ledger hidden in a locked drawer and no man waiting in a dark foyer for someone who didn't owe him an explanation. Just two people who knew each other, who had both done the hard work, who had both chosen freely and with full knowledge of what the choice meant to sit across from each other in the ordinary light. That was enough. That was everything. Samuel Price texted him at 11:43, which Gabriel only knew because his phone buzzed on the nightstand just as he was finally, genuinely moving towards sleep. The text said, "She passed. You should know." Gabriel looked at it for a moment in the dark. He typed back, "I know. She brought dinner to celebrate." There was a pause. Then Samuel wrote, "Good. It's about time." Gabriel set the phone down and lay back in the quiet of his apartment and listened to the last of the rain against the window. Lighter now, almost finished, the way storms always were, eventually loud, and then present, and then diminishing, and then gone, leaving the air cleaner than it was before. He thought about next Friday, about a restaurant, and 7 o'clock, and no interrogation, and Claire on the other side of a table, looking at him with those clear and unafraid eyes. He thought about what she had said the night she left the mansion, that she wanted a man capable of seeing the harm he had caused and choosing to change even when change cost him everything. He had seen it. He had chosen. It had cost him everything. And standing on the other side of that cost, in a modest apartment with a lamp still on and a shipping contract finished and a Friday dinner 1 week away, Gabriel Moretti understood, with the quiet and unshakable certainty of a man who had earned the understanding, rather than simply arrived at it, that the everything he had lost was not the thing he had thought it was. The everything he had kept was. He closed his eyes. Outside, the rain stopped. And in the silence that followed, the kind of silence that means something new is about to begin, Boston settled into the particular piece of a city at midnight, alive and breathing, and full of people making choices, changing directions, becoming slowly and imperfectly, and without guarantee, the people they were capable of being. Gabriel slept without dreaming, and when the morning came, as it always did, he turned toward it.